Welcome to Craving the Heat, where desire takes the lead and every story leaves you wanting more. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments and keep up with our latest naughty stories. The first time I met Adrian Cole, my new boss, I thought he was made of stone. His presence alone seemed to command silence. He was the kind of man who walked into a room and didn't need to say a word. People just straightened their backs, adjusted their ties, and lowered their voices. His reputation preceded him: cold, ruthless, brilliant. He was the man who built empires, who made fortunes, who had no patience for weakness. And then there was me, Emma Dawson, 29, newly hired as his executive assistant, and in a marriage that had long since lost its warmth. My husband, Mark, and I were more like roommates than lovers. We shared bills, dinners, and occasional conversations about mundane things like groceries or car repairs, but the spark we once had was gone. I told myself it was normal, that marriages matured and passion faded. But when I stepped into Adrian's office that first day and felt his icy gaze lock onto me, something inside me stirred that had been dormant for years. Working for him wasn't easy. He was demanding, precise, and sharp with his words. He never smiled, never wasted time on pleasantries. His instructions were clipped, his critiques harsh. Still, there was something about the way he carried himself, an aura of control and discipline, that drew me in. I should have resented him, should have hated the way he made me feel small with a single look, but instead I found myself curious. Who was the man behind that frozen mask? Did he ever laugh? Did he ever soften? Weeks turned into months, and my curiosity grew into something more dangerous. I began to notice things others didn't. The way his jaw tightened when he was deep in thought. The rare flicker of vulnerability in his eyes when he stared too long at the city skyline. The fact that he stayed in the office until ungodly hours, as though he had no home to return to. He was a man who carried his loneliness well, but it was there, beneath the polished surface. And for reasons I couldn't explain, I wanted to be the one to break through his walls. It started with small moments. One evening, I brought him coffee late when he was still working. He looked up, surprised, and for the first time, said, "Thank you," without his usual clipped tone. Another day, I noticed he hadn't eaten all afternoon, so I left a sandwich on his desk without a word. When I returned an hour later, it was gone, and there was a quiet, almost imperceptible nod in my direction. These were tiny cracks in his armor, but to me, they were everything. At home, my marriage grew colder. Mark stopped asking where I was when I came home late, stopped noticing when I was distracted. It was as if we were both waiting for the other to admit what we already knew: we weren't in love anymore. But neither of us said it. Instead, I poured myself deeper into work, into Adrian. The turning point came on a night when the rain fell hard against the city windows. The office was nearly empty, everyone else gone, but Adrian remained, staring at papers he didn't seem to be reading. I lingered, telling myself I was finishing tasks, but really I didn't want to leave him there alone. When I finally walked into his office, he looked up, his eyes tired in a way I had never seen. "You should go home, Emma," he said quietly. I hesitated. "What about you?" He gave a humorless smile. "Home is just another empty room." The words pierced me. Without thinking, I stepped closer, my heart pounding. It doesn't have to be. For a long moment, we just stared at each other, the air between us heavy and electric. Then, almost imperceptibly, his hand brushed mine on the desk. It was the lightest touch, fleeting, but it ignited something fierce inside me. We didn't kiss that night, didn't cross any obvious lines, but something shifted. I went home trembling, my husband asleep on the couch, and I knew nothing would ever be the same again. From that night on, Adrian was different with me. Still cold with others, still sharp in meetings, but when it was just us, there was a softness. Creeping in, he asked about my day. He lingered when our hands touched passing papers. He started walking me to the elevator at night. It was slow, almost agonizing, but undeniable we were falling. The night it finally happened, I had stayed. Late again. A storm raged outside, thunder rolling through the city. We were alone as always. He looked at me with those guarded eyes, and I saw the battle within him, the desire he was trying to fight, the fear of what it meant. I stepped closer, and this time he didn't pull away. His hand lifted to my cheek, tentative, trembling. And then his lips were on mine. The kiss was everything I'd imagined and more hungry, desperate, yet tender in a way that made my knees weak. Years of buried passion spilled out between us. He pulled me against him, and I melted, giving in to every suppressed longing. We whispered each other's names like confessions, like sins, like prayers. In his arms, I felt alive again, seen. Again, desired in a way I hadn't been in so long. Afterward, we sat together in the quiet, our hands still entwined. "This is wrong," he murmured, his voice breaking. "I know," I whispered back. But neither of us let go. What followed were weeks of stolen moments, kisses in the shadows, lingering touches in elevators, secret meetings in hotel rooms. With him, I found passion and tenderness, intensity and vulnerability. He showed me the man behind the mask, wounded, lonely, yet capable of a love so consuming it terrified us both at home, the guilt gnawed at me. Mark remained oblivious, his distance making it easier for me to justify my choices. Still, I knew the truth. I was living two lives, and one of them would eventually destroy the other. But every time I thought about walking away from Adrian, he'd look at me with those eyes that no longer seemed cold, and I couldn't do it. I loved him. And worse, I knew he loved me too. We were a fire burning too bright, too reckless, destined to consume everything around us. And yet, for that first time in years, I felt alive in the flames. The affair with Adrian began to bleed into every corner of my life. It wasn't just the stolen nights anymore, or the lingering touches in the office. It was the way he haunted me in the in-between moments, the way his presence lingered even when he wasn't near. I would sit across from my husband at the dinner table, nodding absently to whatever small talk he tried to make, and in the back of my mind, I was replaying the way Adrian's lips had felt on mine just hours earlier. It was a dangerous double life, and every day I carried it with me like a fragile glass that could shatter at any moment. I tried to convince myself that it was just a phase, that I could eventually stop before things went too far. But the truth was, I had already gone too far. There was no going back from the night we first kissed. No undoing the way his hands had learned the shape of my body, the way my heart had started to beat differently when he was near. Even when I wasn't with him, I was still his Adrian was. Careful, always calculating, but I could see how much he struggled too. He would pull away sometimes, creating distance between us, convincing himself that we could just go back to being boss and assistant. But then I'd catch him staring at me in meetings, his jaw tight, his fingers gripping his pen too hard, and I know he was breaking inside just as much as I was. The push and pull between us was intoxicating, maddening. I craved him even more when he tried to resist. The secrecy made every moment sharper, more electric. We never knew when we might be caught, and that danger only fueled the fire. Late nights in his office became our ritual. He'd close the blinds, lock the door, and pull me into his arms with a hunger that left us both trembling. Sometimes we wouldn't even speak, just hold each other in the dark, breathing in sync, as if that silence was the only language we needed. Other times, he would whisper things he'd never admit in daylight, confessions about how empty his life had been before me, how he hated the man he'd become, how I was the only person who made him feel alive again at home. Mark grew more distant. If he noticed anything, he didn't say it. He seemed content with the quiet routine of our marriage, happy to bury himself in his own distractions. His indifference only deepened the ache inside me. I wanted to feel guilty, but instead I felt angry at the years of neglect, angry at the way he had stopped seeing me long before I stopped loving him. With Adrian, I wasn't invisible. With Adrian, I mattered. One night, after a particularly long meeting that stretched late into the evening, I found myself sitting across from Adrian in a quiet restaurant. It wasn't planned. He had simply asked if I'd eaten, and when I admitted I hadn't, he insisted. We'd go together. For once, we weren't hiding behind locked office doors or stolen shadows. It felt almost normal, almost like we were just two people having dinner. But the way his hand brushed mine under the table, the way his eyes softened when I laughed, reminded me that what we had was anything but ordinary. "Do you ever wish things were different?" I asked, my voice low, almost drowned out by the hum of the room. He looked at me for a long time, his expression unreadable. Finally, he said, "Every day." It was such a simple answer, but it carried the weight of everything we couldn't say. I wanted to ask more, to push him to imagine a life where it was just us. But I didn't. The reality was too complicated, too tangled in obligations and consequences. Still, in that moment, it was enough to know he felt it too. As the weeks went by, our love grew deeper, more consuming. The passion between us was undeniable, but it wasn't just physical anymore. He started to rely on me in ways he never had with anyone else. I saw him vulnerable, saw the cracks in his armor. He wasn't the cold, ruthless man the world believed him to be. He was human, fragile, capable of love that was both fierce and tender. And somehow he had chosen to give that love to me. But the more we had, the more dangerous it became. I began to dread the moment everything would come crashing down. A careless glance in the office, a late night unexplained, a trace of perfume on his suit. It would only take one slip, one suspicion, and the fragile world we had built would shatter. Yet even knowing that, I couldn't stop. Neither of us could. There were nights when I lay awake beside my husband, staring at the ceiling, my heart racing with guilt and longing. I wondered if he ever felt it too, if he sensed the distance, if he suspected that my heart was no longer his. But Mark never asked, never questioned. Maybe he already knew, and maybe he didn't care. That thought hurt more than his potential. Anger ever could. The fire between Adrian and me only burned brighter. We were reckless, desperate, addicted to each other in a way that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. I knew we couldn't live like this forever, that something would eventually force us to choose. But until that day came, I wanted every stolen second, every whispered confession, every passionate kiss that reminded me I was alive. I didn't know what the future held for us, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty: I had fallen in love with Adrian Cole, the man everyone else called cold. And slowly, painfully, dangerously, he had fallen for me too. The affair stretched on like a thread I knew would eventually snap, but I couldn't stop weaving myself deeper into it. Every day felt like a test of willpower, and every night felt like surrender. Adrian and I existed in this fragile in-between world, a place that wasn't quite ours yet felt more real than anything else in my life. There were mornings when I'd wake up and, for a split second, forget whose bed I was in. The warmth of my husband beside me was foreign compared to the heat I carried from Adrian's embrace the night before. I would slip out of bed quietly, hiding the flesh on my cheeks, convincing myself that what I was doing could still be controlled. But deep down, I knew control had vanished long ago. Adrian grew bolder with time. He would call me into his office for no reason, just to look at me, to let his fingers brush mine as he handed me a file, small touches that nobody else would notice. But that set my whole body trembling. We would exchange glances across conference tables, eyes locking for a heartbeat too long. He carried himself like the same cold, untouchable boss to the rest of the world. But I had seen the cracks, and behind those cracks was a man who wanted me just as fiercely as I wanted him. At home, the distance between Mark and me had grown into a canyon. He stayed late at work more often, sometimes claiming he had dinner meetings or late deadlines, though I suspected it was simply his way of avoiding me. The silence between us was suffocating, broken only by the sound of cutlery against plates, or the occasional half-hearted question about my day. He no longer looked at me the way he once did, and maybe that was why I didn't feel guilty every time I thought of Adrian. Maybe in some twisted way, I felt justified. There was one night I'll never forget. The office had emptied out. The city outside was blanketed in rain, and I was gathering my things to leave when Adrian appeared in my doorway. He didn't say anything, just watched me for a moment before stepping inside and closing the door. The sound of the lock clicking was louder than the storm outside. I set my bag down, my heart already racing. "We shouldn't," I began, but the words died when he crossed the room and pressed his lips to mine. It wasn't gentle, it wasn't hesitant, it was desperate, as if he had been holding himself back for too long. I melted into him, my hands fisting in his shirt, the heat between us igniting instantly. We didn't speak after that. We didn't need to. The rain outside and the pounding of our hearts filled the silence. When I finally returned home, I was soaked from running to my car, my lips still swollen, my skin still tingling. Mark was asleep on the couch, the television flickering across his face. For a moment I stood there, watching him, trying to remember when I had last felt anything close to passion with him. The memory wouldn't come. I turned off the TV, pulled a blanket over him, and went upstairs alone. The secrecy became a part of me. I learned how to lie without flinching, how to smile through the ache, how to keep two worlds spinning at once. It was exhausting, but the thought of giving up Adrian was unbearable. He wasn't just my boss anymore. He was the only person who truly saw me, the only one who made me feel alive. One evening, I found myself in his apartment for the first time. He had insisted that we couldn't keep meeting at the office, that we needed somewhere safe. The moment I walked in, I realized how little of himself he showed to the world. The space was quiet, minimalist, almost sterile, as if he had never really lived there. But when he pulled me into his arms, the emptiness didn't matter. We filled the silence with whispers and touches, with confessions that were too dangerous to voice anywhere else. Sometimes I think about walking away from everything, he admitted, his forehead resting against mine. The company, the image, all of it, just being with you. My chest tightened. I wanted to tell him I thought about it too, but I couldn't bring myself to say it out loud. It felt too real, too final. Instead, I kissed him, pouring every unsaid word into the space between us. As the weeks passed, the passion between us grew into something I couldn't contain. It wasn't just stolen kisses and secret meetings anymore. It was love, raw and undeniable. We had crossed a line long ago, but now we were running deeper into it. Neither of us willing to stop. And yet in the back of my mind, I knew the truth. Secrets like ours didn't stay hidden forever. Someone would notice the way my eyes lingered on him too long, or the way he softened only when I was near. The world around us was fragile, and it would only take one slip for everything to shatter. But even knowing that, I couldn't let him go. Adrian had become a part of me, a part I couldn't erase even if I tried. And for as long as he kept choosing me, I knew I would keep choosing him, even if it meant destroying everything else. The affair became a rhythm that wove itself into every part of my life. It was no longer about stolen moments. It was a current that pulled me under, one I no longer resisted. Each morning, I woke with a gnawing anticipation, a hunger that only Adrian seemed able to feed. The way he looked at me changed with time. At first, it had been cautious, testing as though he was unsure whether I would retreat if he reached too far. But now his gaze carried possession, a silent promise that he wasn't letting go of me. When we passed in the office, he didn't need to touch me for my entire body to react. His voice alone, low and deliberate, made my pulse race. We grew reckless. A meeting would end and he'd linger just a little longer, letting our hands brush as everyone else filed out. A late-night project would turn into an excuse to lock the door, the documents forgotten as he pulled me into his arms. The line between work and desire blurred until I could no longer separate the two. At home, Mark barely noticed the distance. He was drowning in his own world, his job, his fatigue, his indifference. Sometimes I wondered if he already knew, if maybe his silence was his way of saying he didn't care anymore. He'd stopped asking where I went after work or why I came home so late. The only time he seemed to look at me was when he was half asleep, his eyes clouded, his face blank. The man I had married felt like a shadow, and every time I compared, That emptiness to the fire Adrian ignited in me, the choice felt less like betrayal and more like survival. There was one night when I broke. I had been with Adrian, tangled in the sheets of his bed, my body humming with the aftermath of our love. He had fallen asleep beside me, his arm draped over my waist, his breathing steady. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, and for the first time, I admitted to myself that I loved him. Not just in secret, not just in the stolen hours weaving through my days, carrying me into the night. It was terrifying and liberating all at once. I slipped out of bed and wandered to his kitchen, pouring myself a glass of water. The apartment was so bare, so unlike him when he was with me. He carried so much loneliness in his life, I realized. The walls were blank, the shelves nearly empty. This wasn't a home, it was a place to sleep, to exist. And yet, he had let me into it. Let me see the parts of himself no one else did. When I returned to the bedroom, he stirred, eyes half open. "Come back," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. I climbed back into bed, curling against him, and he held me tighter. In that moment, I knew he didn't just want me for comfort or distraction. He wanted me because, like me, he had been starving for something real. The following weeks deepened what we had. It grew softer around me, less the cold, distant boss, and more the man who whispered secrets in the dark. I watched him let down walls I didn't think he was capable of lowering. At the office, people began to notice the smallest changes, how he smiled sometimes when he never used to, how his temper had eased, how his eyes seemed brighter. They didn't know it was me behind that change, but I did. And it made my chest swell with pride and fear in equal measure. One evening, as we sat in his apartment with the city lights flickering outside, he turned to me and asked, "Do you ever think about what it would be like if we stopped hiding?" The question hung heavy in the air. My heart raced because I had thought about it endlessly. I had pictured a life where I woke up beside him every morning, where I didn't have to lie, where I could love him freely. But the thought of tearing everything apart, the marriage, the job, the fragile balance of my world was suffocating. I think about it every day, I admitted. My voice cracked, and I couldn't bring myself to meet his eyes. But I don't know if I'm strong enough to lose everything else. He reached for my hand, his thumb brushing over my skin. "You wouldn't lose everything. You'd still have me." And that was the truth that scared me most. Because I believed him, from then on, something shifted. Our moments together carried a weight they hadn't before. It wasn't just about desire anymore, it was about the possibility of a future. I found myself clinging to him tighter, memorizing every detail as if I was preparing for a day when I'd have to choose. But choices like ours don't stay hidden. Whispers began. A colleague lingered a little too long outside Adrian's office, watching me leave late one night. Mark asked, casually but with an edge in his voice, why I seemed so distracted lately. I brushed it off with excuses, but my heart hammered in my chest, afraid of what he might see if he looked closer. Still, I couldn't stop. Each night I promised myself I would pull away, and each morning I found myself drawn back to Adrian as if my soul had been tied to his. Passion had become love, love had become need, and need had become the air I breathed. I told myself I could live like this forever, in the space between lies and truth, between duty and desire. But deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time. Before the walls I built came crashing down around me. And when they did, nothing, not my marriage, not my career, not even my heart would ever be the same again.